Good early morning, everybody. It's Lorraine Alternative Homesteading, and yes, it's a ridiculous hour of the morning. It's 2 o'clock in the morning, and it's October 13, 2024, and I apologize for not having the live at 10 p.m., which I usually do it on Saturday. Well, guess what happened on the way to the chat? Yes, the criminals put me to sleep for pretty much an hour. And by the time I woke up, if this has ever happened to you, I'm totally discombobulated, don't feel like doing anything. It takes me about 40 minutes to, kind of snap out of it. But during that time, I wanted to check my security camera footage, and that's when I was able to post the video of, here, let me just get this here, of the criminals driving back and forth, the WOPS, the cops, the MOPS, the LOPS, the POPs, the predators on patrol, etc. And from 8:36 p.m. until the time I posted that, let me see here. 1 second, let me get it for you, because they drove by again. From 8:36 p.m. to 11:20 p.m., these criminals drove back and forth 11 times. 11. On this remote country road, there's nothing open. It's not like, if you're living in New York City, or even if you're living, even when I lived in New Jersey, there would be like a Starbucks that you can go to and it would close at 11 or 12 o'clock. There is nothing remotely around here that you can drive to that is open for anything. Cup of coffee, nothing. Okay, so the only reason people would be driving back and forth all day long is to pulse me with radiation and harassment. And particularly after they know that they've already knocked me out, right? So meanwhile, after 11:20 p.m., I wanted to check on my cats. As soon as I opened my front door, 2 cars drive by from right to left, side by side, down the county road. And this was after midnight. It's around 12:30 in the morning. Obviously, to stalk me. They probably got the little ringy dingies to their phones, right? And they're salivating, and they have to drive by because they're predators. So anyway, this beautiful little original oil painting is by Linda Russell, Linda's Angel Arts, and it's entitled Cat Angel, December 2022. So, Clint, thank you. Clint is a subscriber, and he sent me a webinar, and I'm surprised it's still up here. It's from the Defense Systems, DSIAC, Defense Systems Information Analysis Center. They do have a website. And I was looking at the website. I thought it was really interesting because they have a seminar dated September 25 of this year about corrosion. When you corrode something, like you deliberately rust something. Well, evidently in the military, this is concerning because their vehicles, which are metal, their Humvees and all that, will corrode, especially if they're in a desert or near water. You'll get pitted. So they want to figure out a way to prevent that from happening. And the only way that you can scientifically research on how to prevent something from happening is by causing it to happen and then reversing it. It's sort of like, all the animals that are being disgustingly experimented on. They have to inject them with chemicals and poisons and diseases in order to pretend that they're curing them. And that's why a lot of targeted people, including myself, complain that these criminals will rust screws, nails, things that are galvanized, etc., etc. So I guess another word for it, the rusting, is corrosion. They are corroding objects around your property to make it look old and ugly. And they do that here. But the individuals responsible for this technology is the Department of Defense. Make no mistake, it's the Department of Defense. So one of their webinars that is still up on YouTube, and even other people who have commented that they're surprised that it's still up, and maybe it'll be taken down after I discuss this. I mean, obviously I can't, I'm sure it's copyrighted information, and I mean, I'm already targeted by the DOD, the FBI, the local neighbors, the Freemasons, the predators on patrol, my sick neighbors, the Scarlet Letter, which, by the way, yes, and thank you for locating the cease and desist letter on my channel that I read out loud to Scarlet Marks. So this has been an ongoing issue with her. She's a predator. She's a stalker, and it's all in writing, and it all can be proven. So there doesn't need to be an investigation when it comes to Scarlet. The evidence is right there. However, Sheriff, you can definitely perform an investigation on who's destroying the lands on my property. I'll give you permission to perform an investigation. You bring your investigator here and videotape and photograph the damage, and then you can investigate and come back to me and tell me who's performing the damage. But as far as Eddie and Scarlet Marks, you don't need to do an investigation. I already provided you the videos, the cease and desist letters. Go and arrest them. Stick them in the county jail where they belong. Give me a restraining order. Anyway, and I still haven't had time. She will be reported to the Nursing Bureau. Yes, she will be. And you know what? If CPS were not such a disgusting organization, I would report her to Child Protective Services, because no child should be in the care of a stalker, somebody that screams obscenities at you. Going back to 2019, there is no child that should grow up in that environment. However, Child Protective Services is nothing better. So I would never do that, because he happens to be a good little boy. Maybe he just needs to be adopted into another family. But anyway, we're going to continue. Anyway, the webinar that was given to me, and I'll only play a little bit of it, because this is by somebody who designed this from the Department of Defense, right? It's the DSIAC webinar, High-Powered Radio Frequency Microwave Directed Energy Weapon Effects. Okay, now obviously I can't play the whole thing, but because it is a video on YouTube, YouTube does not mind if I share videos that are already on to YouTube, like links to YouTube videos, but they absolutely mind if I redirect you outside of YouTube. So I can provide a link to this so you can watch the entire thing. It's 50 minutes long, but listen up here. I'll play this for you guys so that you can hear it for yourself.
Things. Some of those names are such things as electromagnetic weapons, RF weapons, non-nuclear EMP, electronic bombs, etc. The main definition is that HPMDs are electromagnetic sources that can generate and direct intense radio frequency microwave energy at a target. It says electronic target there, but actually it's to be more general, since there are some non-lethal directed energy weapons that could also be other types of targets. There's no direct definition for what's the difference between a high-power microwave DEW and a radar, but we've attempted to basically have a dividing point of that if a source has a peak effective radiated power of greater than 100 megawatts or radiated energy of greater than 1 joule per second.
Now, I just want to mention something. When they label one of these weapons non-lethal, that is absolute BS. Every one of these is lethal. Okay? They can actually use any one of these with a lethal dose, but what they tend to do is have it at a certain frequency generated in pulses over longer periods of time, short periods of time and long periods of time. And everybody knows, if you're a targeted person, that they do this to you every day, right? It's called slow unaliving for a reason, okay? It's deliberately designed for plausible deniability to cause effects that manifest in the body over a long period of time, to mimic other illnesses, diseases, etc., when in fact they are specifically being induced in your body based upon the frequency, the level of the frequency, the type of weapons they're using.
It typically would fall into the area of high-power microwave sources. The range of frequencies of these sources can vary significantly depending upon what you're talking about. As it shows there, you're talking anywhere from the electromagnetic spectrum of high frequency to very high frequency to ultra high frequency to microwaves to millimeter waves. And the most important thing to remember about HPMDs, the takeaway from all of this, is that they can attack targets with and without intentional antennas and receivers. That's unlike traditional electronic warfare jammers. They also can produce persistent effects that last much longer than the time the beam is on the target. As a result, they can produce temporary electronic upset or if there's significant energy damage. As a result of this, we call this sometimes unconventional electronic attack, and we'll explain more about that later. The next slide shows the major components of a high-power microwave directed energy weapon. Those of you familiar with radar will see a similarity as far as the source goes. Typically, in any system, you've got to have some form of prime power. That prime power could be an electrical generator, it could be a battery pack, or it could be the potential of using explosives to try to generate the energy necessary. The prime power must then be conditioned to produce pulses, and the pulse powers typically are some sort of a capacitive inductive type of network, such as a pulse forming network, or in some sources it may be high power switches, either high power switch tubes or solid state. As far as the RF source goes, there's two typical types of RF sources. Those that produce pulse continuous wave energy, and since in the frequency domain that's a narrow band, they're called narrow band sources. Examples of narrow band sources are magnetrons, traveling wave tube amplifiers, klystron amplifiers, and gyrotron types of sources. There's also the other type of RF source, which we'll go into in more detail, is a transient source, if you will, an impulse type of source. As a result, in the frequency domain, that produces a very wide band to ultra-wide band of frequencies. That typically is some form of a spark gap, electronic switch, or ferrite lines. There's also now I don't cover this in the presentation, but nonlinear transmission line types of devices that are becoming of great interest. Now we need, of course, an antenna in order to get the RF energy out of the HPMD to the target. In terms of antennas, again, there were kind of two major categories. For narrowband antennas, one of the typical ways of doing that is with high-power aperture antennas, such as parabolic reflectors, horns, and those type of things. They typically are going to be for the higher frequencies, starting with the microwaves regime of either 1 gigahertz on up or below that. And they typically will have a high gain and high directivity depending upon the size of the aperture. The amount of gain of an antenna is directly proportionate to the size of the antenna aperture, the physical size of the aperture, and then inversely to the wavelength. The good thing about a narrowband antenna is it normally produces a well-defined pattern so that you can very much know off-bore sight what it is. The next type of antenna is what we call a wideband antenna, and of course that goes with wideband sources. Because the wideband sources produce such a wide variety of frequency, the type of antenna here is typically some sort of either dipole, monopole, or some sort of transverse electromagnetic horn. They tend to be in the lower frequencies, more like in the VHF, UHF range. The antenna tends to have less gain, and the off-site, the off-bore site pattern is more difficult to determine. Then, of course, the RF energy must propagate out of the antenna through the environment to the target. Through the environment, the main loss is the range, because the energy will decrease as 1 over the range squared as it moves out from the source.
This is why they will locate areas that are closest to you. When I get into bed at night, you know, it's usually late. I mean, you could see what time it is. It's after 2 o'clock in the morning. And this is not the usual time that I want to fall asleep. When I lived in New Jersey, I would like to be in bed by midnight. But here in Kentucky, because they knock me out all the time, you know, I've got things to do. It's usually much later. But almost always when I get into bed at night, you know how when you hit the head and you start falling asleep, you start relaxing, and you're not quite in your sleep state yet. I always hear people on my property. You could hear them running. It's not like they're walking or tiptoeing. They're literally running past the back of my house. I kid you not. I mean, I hear it. And then I always hear something clicking on and off inside my roof. So something that they have implanted in the roof of my house. Now, when my house was delivered, it wasn't built here. It was built by Amish somewhere else and delivered here and then hooked up to the electrical and plumbing. So they had to go into this new building and implant the building with whatever technology that they're using against me. So now this video has the effects on the target a little bit later on in it. I mean, I'm not going to play the whole thing. You know, I don't want to get a copyright or whatever. But I will post the link for you there. Now, when I came into the targeting community with all the groups that are out there whose names I won't mention and stuff, no one, not one person, not any alleged leader, whatever, nobody ever mentioned high-powered microwaves. The only one who mentioned it and discussed through the wall radar was Helena Chorba. She was a targeted female who lived in Pennsylvania. She was unalived. She passed away. She wrote extensively because she was a retired civil engineer. And she educated everybody about through the wall radar, that it's generally used in searches, but it's also utilized in civil engineering and construction. You know, that a lot of times they want to find out where a leak is or where a fault line is or whatever, and they use these radars. And of course it has a very positive use out in the environment. But of course the nefarious people decide, oh well, we could use this to spy on people, to locate people in their homes, to torture them. So every one of these technologies that is allegedly invented for the good is also used for evil. But anyway, Helena Chorba was the only person who ever discussed through the wall radar. No one, until Helena came along and discussed it in the high-powered microwaves and stuff. But as you could hear from this presentation, it's pretty bad, actually. I mean, the visuals are okay, but you could hear in the background people shuffling, like they're moving around and stuff. It's sort of like you hear people moving around inside of a classroom. It doesn't seem to be all that professionally crafted or produced or whatever. But anyway, I'm going to sign off for now. I just wanted to bring that to your attention. I also wanted to tell you why we didn't have the chat, the live tonight. I mean, I'll have it next week. But I'm also going to be interviewed again by Richard Moore. It's actually at my request. I wanted to give him an update on what's happening here in Kentucky. Because after he interviewed me a couple of weeks ago and it was posted online, that is when Scarlett drove back and forth 4 times, yelling at me, surveilling me as I'm raking leaves and stuff. And then early that morning at 12:03 a.m., her family decides to pull up and dump toilet paper, some of which appear to be used, all over my driveway. So not only did they trespass, because I saw where their vehicle was parked, which is past my property marker in my driveway, not only did they trespass my property, they littered my property, and that's also a form of stalking and harassment, because Scarlett had already done so 4 times. And all of that information, all of those videos were presented to the deputies when they arrived here. And 10 days later, I don't have a copy of the incident because they haven't created it. There's no reason for them to say, oh, it's under investigation. You don't need to investigate it. All the evidence is right there. Go arrest them. If they want to perform an investigation, come on over and I'll show you all the vandalism, and then you could find out who's done it. And then I'll have it documented, clearly documented. So anyway, thank you for listening, and I will post a link to this presentation. And also, when I give you the link, you can see that they have other videos posted, and they direct you to their website. Just beware, because when you go to their website, if you want to view any of their past videos, there's the redirection disclaimer from the Department of Defense. So you probably don't want to go to their website to view any of these videos. I mean, I was very interested in viewing their video on their corrosion invention. But I don't want to give away all of my personal information on their website. And you know how they target people based upon the the URLs that you click on, although it doesn't really matter at this point anymore. But that's what they do. And who knew that? Maybe 10, 15 years ago, when we're performing research online, even like for school, even for like for my master's, clicking on certain links for my master's, it just sets off these people that you're researching this information. But anyway, I'll get off my rant for now. It's early in the morning. I hope everybody's doing well. And thank you, everybody, for the links. That's Clint who provided this link to me on the DSIAC webinar, High Power Radio Frequency Microwave Directed Energy Weapon Effects. And of course, the effects we didn't get to yet. They're just describing basically what they do. The prime power, the pulse power, the RF source, and the antenna. And then probably midway through, it'll get into the effects, like how these frequencies affect the target. And that's what they call them, the target. Okay, now they're not saying what the target is. They're not saying if the target is an animal, because you know that they perform target practice on animals. Anybody who doesn't believe that, it's true. But they're also using it on humans. And of course they probably use it on dummies and stuff like that. But anyway, hope everybody's doing well. I'm going to post this for you guys, and I will talk to you soon.